Clement Greenberg begins his essay on modernist painting by explaining what is modernism. Modernism, according to him, includes more than art and literature. It covers culture in its entirety and is of historical novelty. It has a self critical tendency. Clement Greenberg believes that Kant was the first real modernist because he was the first to criticize the means of criticism itself. The essence of modernism lies in the use of the characteristic methods of a discipline to criticize the discipline itself, like Kant used logic to establish the limits of logic. Though self criticism of modernism grew out of Enlightenment, it was quite unlike it. Enlightenment criticized from the outside, whereas modernism criticized from the inside. This new criticism appeared first in philosophy and then in other fields and demanded a rational justification for every formal activity. Religion could not avail this Kantian criticism in order to justify itself. But art saved itself by proving that the experience it provided was valuable enough in its own right. Each art thus had to determine the effects exclusive to itself, narrowing its area of competence and making its possession of that area more certain. The unique area of competence of each art coincided with the uniqueness in the nature of its medium. The task of self criticism became to eliminate every effect borrowed from other art. In this way, art gets purity, and purity meant self definition. And the enterprise of self criticism in the art became one of self definition with a vengeance. Realistic art used art to conceal art, whereas modernism used art to call attention to art. The limitations that constituted the medium of painting, like the flat surface, the shape of the support, the properties of pigment, were considered as negative forces by the old masters, but under modernism they became positive forces and were recognized and acknowledged openly. Manet's became the first modernist pictures by virtue of the frankness with which they declared the flat surfaces on which they were painted. The Impressionists in Manet's wake abjured underpainting and glazes and left the eye under no doubt that the colors they used were made of paint and that they came from tubes or pots. Cezanne sacrificed correctness to fit his drawings to the rectangular shape of the canvas. It was the fundamental process of stressing on the flatness by which pictorial art criticized and defined itself under modernism. Flatness was unique to pictorial art. The enclosing shape of the picture was a limiting condition. It shared color with theatre and sculpture, but flatness of painting was shared with no other art. Old masters believed it was necessary to preserve integrity of the picture plane as it signified the enduring presence of flatness underneath and a vivid illusion of a three-dimensional space above. The modernists reversed these terms. They made us aware of what flatness contains. Modernist picture, thus, must be seen as a picture first, and modernism's success in doing so is the success of self-criticism. Modernist painting did not abandon representation of recognizable objects in principle, but represented the space that the recognizable objects inhabited. Abstractness, according to Greenberg, is not necessary in self-criticism of pictorial art. An illustration by itself has no uniqueness, but its association is important. The recognizable entities exist in three-dimensional space, but it being the province of sculpture, to achieve autonomy, painting has to divest itself of everything it might share with sculpture, so painting became abstract. Painting's resistance to sculpture dates back to before the advent of modernism. Though Western painting owes to sculpture that taught it how to shade and model for the illusion of relief, yet some of the greatest feats of Western painting are because paintings tried to rid itself of the sculptural. The first effort to do so dates back to the 16th century Venice, and it was done in the name of color. In the 18th century, David tried to revive sculptural painting to save pictorial art from decorative flattening out due to the emphasis on color. Yet, the strength of David's best picture lies in color. But Ingres, his pupil, subordinated color and executed portraits that were flattest and among the least sculptural painting in West since 14th century. Therefore, by the middle of 19th century, all turned towards an anti-sculptural direction. From color versus drawing, the question became that of optical experience against optical experience, resulting in Cézanne and the Cubists after him to react against Impressionism. David reacted against Fragonard, and Cubist counter-revolution resulted in painting being flatter than anything in Western art since Giotto and Cimabue. So flat indeed that they were hardly recognizable images. Cardinal norms of painting began with the onset of modernism. Pictures enclosing shape loosened, then tightened, then became isolated, then tightened again by successive generations of modernist painters. Norms of finish paint texture, value, color contrast, all were revised, but the testing or experiment was not finished yet. But norms of discipline, when defined, limits the conditions that a picture must comply with to be experienced as a picture. Modernism pushed back these limits indefinitely. Picture turned into an arbitrary object, crisscrossing black lines, colored rectangles of Mondrian paintings gave new force by echoing shape. Once we get used to abstractness, we realize it's conservative in color and subservient to the frame. But the flatness can never be absolute flatness. The heightened sensitivity of the picture no longer permitted sculptural illusion, but it did permit optical illusion. Old masters created illusion of space in depth, and one could imagine oneself walking into it. But the analogous illusion created by modernist painter can only be seen with the eye, literally or figuratively. Impressionist or neo-impressionist were not misguided when they flirted with science. Kantian self-criticism itself found its fullest expression in science and not in philosophy. Visual art should therefore confine itself exclusively to what is given in visual experience and make no reference to anything given in any other order or experience, is a notion whose only justification lies in scientific consistency. Art's convergence with science shows the profound degree to which modernist art belongs to the same specific cultural tendency as modern science, and this is of the highest significance as a historical fact. Art has always been carried in spontaneous and subliminal ways. It was always a matter of practice and not of theory. With a few exceptions like Mondrian, the masters of modernism have had no more fixed ideas about art than Corot did. Certain inclinations, certain affirmations and emphasis, and certain refusals and abstinences as well seem to become necessary simply because the way to go stronger, more expressive art lies through them. The immediate aims of the modernists were and remain personal before anything else, and the truth and success of their works remain personal before anything else. The accumulation over decades of a good deal of personal paintings reveal the general self-critical tendency of modernist painting. Modernism means devolution, unraveling of tradition and further evolution. Modernist art continues the past without gap. Making of pictures has been controlled. The Paleolithic painters could disregard the norm of the frame and worked on a support, a rock wall, a bone, a horn, or a stone, whose limits and surface arbitrarily given by nature. Picture meant deliberate choosing of a flat surface, circumscribing and limiting it. These limiting conditions, however, are altogether human conditions. Modernism does not offer theoretical demonstrations, it converts theoretical possibilities into imperative ones, tests theories about art for their relevance, revives reputation of Greco-Giotto, not lowering that of Leonardo, Raphael. The past did appreciate the masters justly, but gave wrong reasons for doing so often. What role does journalism play in modern art? Art criticism, art history lag behind modernism as it lagged behind pre-modernistic art. Written things about modern art belong to journalism, not critical or art history. Journalism hails each new phase of modernist art as the start of a new epoch, breaking from customs. Everyone, regardless of how informed or well uninformed they are, has a say about it. Each time expectations are met or disappointed. Modernist art takes place in intelligible society of taste and tradition. Thus, art can be summed up as continuity. Lacking the past of art and the need and compulsion to maintain its standards of excellence, modernist art would lack both substance and justification.